Hello, everybody. Got a few things to go over today, which this is the second lecture of week 4, which means after this, I'm expecting around 3 o'clock today, but that'll put us halfway through the course already. 8-week classes do go quick. I've read over all the proposals. They look good. I like to read project proposals a couple times. I'll read them once and then think about it and then read them again and think about it a little more, and then I'll make sure everything's clear and understand what you're making. And the main thing I usually look for is that nobody tries to do a project that's way too big for the course. On the first read through, all of them look good, but I usually read them 3 times, and I'll read it one last time when I put comments in the grade book. But tentatively, all the projects look good. I expect to have the grades. I expect to have comments on those in the grade book by tomorrow, midday tomorrow or so. Maybe early afternoon tomorrow. I just remember to have a meeting in Louisville in the morning. I'm not sure what time I'll get to the office, but sometime in the middle of the day tomorrow, I should have the comments in the grade book, or send you an email requesting more information or something. But tentatively, all of them look good. So I've got a couple other things to look at today. We didn't quite finish the stuff that I was hoping to get rushed through before the meeting on Monday. But yeah, we can finish looking at that, and then we'll jump into the next topic for today. Just a couple things with I'll open these files up and remind you where we were the other day. So I'm just going to open them with my text editor. So we just had random HTML elements, nothing super fancy there, and we were looking at a lot of things that aren't necessarily deleted the element. Different aspects surrounding the element. So the two at the top there hover, so when our mouse hovers over one of the paragraphs, we can change the style rules to that. Or in child, we've made all the even ones a different color, which that one is particularly useful when we get to tables, which I think is week 6. It's still a couple weeks away, but when we get to tables, in modern America, I'm sure you all have seen tables of alternating rows, make them a lot easier to read when we just have tables of raw data. So that one's pretty really useful there. On links, when we're clicking it, change the color of the ones we've already visited, because if we don't do that, by default, those links will all have a bright blue color. And after we've been to that, after the user has been to that site, they'll turn that dark purple color, which oftentimes there's a good chance that that dark purple is not going to match the style of our page. So I want to make it match a little bit better. And then we got started into media queries. We kind of saw this as an attribute in the element. The actual element that we put onto the picture element. I can't remember which one it was. Sorry, my mind went blank for a second. When we looked at images, the picture element that we put different sources inside, so large, medium, small pictures, some that fit the screen size, and we adjusted for that. So we'll have those. That's going to be a big deal coming up soon. I guess we ran out of time looking at the content. And while we're printing it, we don't need fancy colors printed off the page, right? We can just print those words in black, and that'll look a lot better on the white paper. Background colors are automatically removed when we print. Change the color of the brown one, but let's go ahead and look at this. I think I started to look at that and made a typo, but then it was 3 o'clock and I had to rush to the meeting. So we have a little bit more dynamic things going on with our style. We looked at when we go to print it, have those links, they still have the color we set, but at this point, we can't tell where that link goes. Y'all have probably seen lots of web pages that say click here, right? I think I did that in your homework assignment. This this morning, a couple people said they were having trouble finding the file, so I made a new file, a new spot in course resources module, the resources module, and it has a link that just says click here, and then that downloads the files. I also sent them out as an announcement. I thought I'd come up with a nice place to keep files and stuff like that, and I've heard from a couple people that are going to find them. So apparently, it wasn't a good spot to keep them, so I put it in the resources module, and just send out as an announcement. But the one in the resources module, the link just says click here to download the files. If you print those pages, that's incredibly useless on a piece of paper, right? Maybe you might have seen it doing research or something in your English class. You print out your sources and you're going through it later, highlighting things, annotating, all that. And you get to a spot where the sentence it's in sounds like it's the perfect material for your essay, but the link just says click here. And there's no telling where that goes. So that's what the content one was. I started to do it, and I think I hit a typo and then had to rush out of class. So we also have a content property we can put in a CSS declaration, and we can do different content. So, for example, and put the words "this is a link," which hopefully you realize pretty quick that we're getting ready to change those words, but just a string afterwards. And yeah, still trying to translate that into Latin, but lorem ipsum is not Latin. It doesn't seem to have changed anything, right? And this is actually where the typo was, because the link element itself already has some content. We don't want to change the content there. So the typo from the other day is we want to do something like after the link. So using those two elements again, let's add some content afterwards or before. Hopefully y'all can figure it out, fill in that gap, right? If we have a colon after, then obviously we have a colon before as well. That puts it before or after our graph. And now when we print it, it kind of blended in there. Kind of zoom in on this. Yeah. We can see those words showed up right after the link. I probably should have put a space. That's back to the introductory programming lesson, right? Everybody's first lesson in programming is concatenating strings. So remember spaces, things like that. But instead of this, instead of just some words, if we put the attribute function, ATTR, that gives us the ability to ask about any attributes from that element. And in particular, this one only has one attribute in the element, but that's the part we'd be most interested in when we print that out, right? So if somebody sees the paper version, they can figure out where that link goes and manually type in the address. That's a common thing to happen with people. A lot of people like to print out their sources for essays and things to highlight and annotate, and then the links become useless. So it's really useful one to have on there. So we use the attribute. We want to print out the href attribute, and before it, we probably want a space, maybe a space and some parentheses. Oops, this parenthesis, and then afterwards we'll put a parenthesis in another space. Make it nice and readable. And now when we print that, you all probably seen this one. That's a very common one, right? When you get the paper version of the website, you can see exactly where the link goes. A very, very useful thing. There's one that's on a big assignment later this semester. You should probably look at here while we're looking at the print stuff. I'm gonna sit and just choose one of these paragraphs at random. So maybe this one. I'm gonna add a class so we can identify this one. And then you can count which one it was about break. So on that, so I just added an identifier in one of the paragraphs, chose that paragraph at random, so it doesn't really matter which one. But when you do the, what is the name of the segment? The HTML essay at the end of the semester. One of the requirements is when you hit print, it needs to look like you printed it from Microsoft Word, basically, with all the standard MLA or APA formatting or whichever one I put in the instructions this time. So for that, we can select that element we just chose, and there's an attribute page break after or page break before. I'll do it after. Following MLA or APA or Chicago style, NMA, or there's actually lots and lots and lots of them, but whichever one's in the instructions, it's definitely going to have the requirement that there's a page break before the works cited or references or whatever we call that page, whatever we call our sources in that. And our options for here are basically always or never. So obviously on that HTML essay, you're going to want that to be always. So always do a page break after that paragraph, which I didn't count, but we should be able to tell pretty quickly where the page break is, right? Hit print, and looks like we have 3 paragraphs, and then the page break after the third one, and then our others go on to the next page. That will be very important when you get to the HTML essay, which often sounds overwhelming, but people in the past, people always like that. People always enjoy that assignment once they've done it. It's one where you have a little bit of creative freedom, but you're still going for a certain goal, and people get excited when they see it working at the end. It's really good ones. Things that needs to match formatting style and stuff. Some people have taken that further and made it look like somebody printed the essay and then set it down on a chair. That was a really nice one. Then last spring, somebody heard that thought and took it a little bit further and made it look like the essay was printed on paper, and there were page breaks and stuff spread out. So as you scrolled through it, there was also a hand there with a pen sitting on top of it to make it look like somebody was writing the essay. But people usually have a lot of fun with those. So those are two of the most important. Sometimes you want to make sure there's page breaks when you go to print stuff, because obviously we don't have page breaks on the screen. And if you're going to print links, it's really, really nice to go ahead and put the URL, which we can grab from the href attribute, and just add that after the links for printing. But that's not the only alternate thing we could do. We could set a media query up here on our default ones that I'm going to erase this line, but obviously there's app media screen. Right, that's the default, so all of our lines down there, that's what happens when we show it on the screen. But along with the screen, there different things could happen, right? So, oops, I didn't mean to hit save there. Make that a little bit smaller. It's a little bit smaller there. I can drag it over if something looks more like a phone.
For some reason,
What's that?
For some reason, the page break thing isn't working.
Everything's in there. Page break after or page break before.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, hang on. I think
sometimes it takes a couple looks. Something I've found over the years, if you know which line the error is happening in and you don't see it, it's best just to erase that line and type it again. The human brain has a tendency to fill in gaps. It's to avoid sensory overload. We don't process all the information our eyes pick up.
I did after, but I done on the final one.
Oh,
Didn't think about.
oh, so
Yeah,
just gonna see it. Yeah, our brain tries to avoid sensory overload and just fills in gaps. Like we can all see our nose all the time, we just ignore it. That's why that classic cover your nose joke is funny at a certain age. Whenever a kid hits that age where they first start ignoring their nose, if you point it out, they're going to realize something's missing. It's something the brain does naturally, we can't help it. And it happens all the time when we're writing programming code because our brain knows what is supposed to be typed on that line. And our eyes will look at the screen, see something, and the brain will just be like, oh, I don't need that information. How do you know what that line says? So it fills in gaps. So if you know which line the error is on, but you don't see it, it's best just try erasing that line and typing it again. Over the years, I found that works more times than it doesn't. Also, part of the reason programmers work as teams. The sizes as well. I'll go here. If you're in Google Chrome, open the inspector. You see this little button right here, I need to circle it. I got a red pen, so circle in red there. The one on the right, it looks like I circled both buttons. That's an emulator. So if you want to preview what the site's going to look like on other devices, like right now, an iPhone XR. So this is what that page would look like on an iPhone XR. Our hypertext doesn't do anything, so we don't need that on. There is no hover on a touchscreen. We have different ones. It would look like on Pixel 7, Galaxy Fold, where it stretches everything out, but fairly narrow, and gives us a nice preview of what it's going to look like. So the emulator button is right here, or just looking at browsers in different sizes, right? The user has complete control over what size they're going to view that page in, not the developer. So we don't know how people are going to be looking at their screen, whether it's small, big, maximized, what size monitor they have on it. We don't have any control over that. And sometimes the Star rules won't carry through very well. This is a big assignment next week, I believe. So we're going to down. And we can handle that with media queries. So come down here after printing one, and we can set up another media query. At media, should probably do screen and size, but I'm just going to do size. At media, let's say min width of, I need parentheses here. Min width of 900 pixels. We want to change all our rules, so if we make it smaller, let's change the colors on our fingertips. For a trivial example here, 120/30 should be something green, and I'll change this one to 22/240/12. That should be a dark green. But whenever we get to a certain that size, we'll get should get a different style size. So when it's full all the way up, you see we get a different page. I might find where 900 pixels is here. And we go down to a certain part and we get back to the other thing. So min width is 900 pixels or bigger. Anything bigger than that is going to apply those, otherwise it's going to fall back on the next smaller size. And obviously I'll leave it that size. If you go the other way, the max width, this is going to be big for the assignment next week when you're doing multiple devices, and that just splits it. So everything smaller than 900 pixels has the green, and then once we pass that width, we'll get back to the regular blue. That's the big ones to start off with. That's the ones I was hoping to get by 3 o'clock the other day. There are lots of pseudo elements. You'll see quite a few. It's a long, exhaustive list. There's an appendix in our book. Or I think the other day before class ended, I pointed out Mozilla's page. So pseudo select for CSS, and MDN Web Docs is the one Mozilla put out. So the people that made the Firefox browser, and for those used to other programming languages, Mozilla also makes plugins, which are like libraries and modules, or we call them something different in all our languages. But the thing we import into CSS to have more functionality. Mozilla makes a lot of those, but they have really good reference material. We looked at the official reference material, but today we're going to talk about layout, and this is where I usually like to go ahead and look at the best reference material. So quick picture on the board. I'll do a quick wireframe. Does anybody have any questions about pseudo elements or media queries prior to sitting around and trying random things with them? But that's why we have lots of lab time. So the plan has us wrapping up at about 3 o'clock again today. So there's 45 minutes that should be blocked off on your schedule already for learning CSS and HTML, but this class is a lot more for CSS. Okay, so for wireframe thus far, all of our stuff just kind of crossed the whole page. And we'd have the header, maybe a footer down here, and in between we'd have a bunch of paragraphs that went all the way across the page every time. And that's all we've seen so far. Obviously, the next step is to start modifying that a little bit. Let's see if the red shows up on the camera. Is that visible?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I used to have like large numbers of colors that I carried in all the classes, and I learned very quickly that not all of them show up on the camera. It's a short list. So maybe we still want our header to go all the way across and keep our footer going all the way across, but inside have our text in maybe columns. I'll put a picture over here. Throw a little stick man in there for a picture. We haven't seen that yet, so that's the next thing. How do we split our text up into columns and organize things differently? Move things to the right or the left, up or down. We quickly mentioned spacing between things, the margins and padding at the beginning, but this is the week where we're going to get a lot more practice with the margins and padding and things like that. That's kind of the next thing to look at, and we have a lot of options that we can do that with. Looks like we have 5 paragraphs. I got that right. Yeah, 5 paragraphs. A little iris navigation section, and we could add a header in there real quick and a footer, and that would kind of fill out with what we have here nicely. Split those things up into columns and all that. So I'll just extend this page a little bit. going to change this to a section because we don't have any sections there, or an aside. We haven't seen that one. I usually think aside makes me think of ads. I don't know why, but that's where that's the element I always use to delete for ad space, but something about the name fits, but put it down the side. Then our paragraphs, it's best to do this with containers, but since those are the only paragraphs we have, it'll be okay with paragraphs. Normally we want to put like a section and maybe an article, and then nest a couple of paragraphs in there and split it up that way. I think I did that backwards. It's a section of an article, but I always seem to put those two backwards. I think it'll be okay with paragraphs here, so I'm just gonna leave that there, and I'll come up here, maybe add a header. And in between the header, adds maybe H3 with our week 4 example. And then maybe an H6. So I think we've been doing H1s all this semester. We have 6 levels of headers. For H6, what are we doing this? Pseudo elements, pseudo selectors, media queries, and layouts. And maybe a footer at the bottom so it matches that picture I just drew in red. Come down here and put a footer element. Since only the things in the middle have a paragraph right now, normally I would put a paragraph here and just edit that one. There's a small element that'll just make it a little bit smaller, so I'll just put it down here. And we have that copyright symbol. Copyright 2024. That's probably good. Good enough for a footer. That'll give us some things, a few elements to mess around with. Is there a way I can just say never on this?
You could say pages never in Latin. There's an online there instead of an option.
I'll just try to ignore it. I just like white boxes. Those have been fixed. They got last year, late spring. So we'll see it in a couple weeks. They added a new HTML element, actually 2 of them, dialogues and modals, which are pop-up boxes that now the web designer or developer has control over those pop-up boxes. So we don't have arbitrary white boxes popping up that we can't change the style of or anything. We can put the same message into something that fits our web page. Looks way, way better.
Oh, good. The web developers actually have control over the pop-up ads.
Well, it's used more for form inputs and stuff. Dialogues and modals are the input buttons. So a dialogue is to gather some input, and a modal is usually informational. Modals are the ones that just pop up a message and then have the OK button. And the dialog box pops up a little box that you give input, where you give input, and then usually have at least an OK and a cancel button on them. We'll see those in a couple weeks. That gives us a few elements, but it's still matching this old style where everything just crosses the whole page. And we have lots of different ways that we can do this. So I'm going to make copies of this now. So I'm going to change index. So I'm going to I'll go to save as. Save as, make a copy of it, and call this absolute.html. Then I'm going to keep the index page open so that we can link to these others, because that's the one that we're going to start with. So instead of these arbitrary links, let's put in a link to our page. So the first one will be absolute positions. And it's on the same site, so we just need to give the file name, absolute.html. And then for this, I'm going to make a new style sheet. So a style sheet that has absolute positioning. And I'll copy that into a new file. Oops.
What's
Save
that? What's that index page that you did?
The index page is the one we were working on the other day. So that's what we were doing.
Oh, and you just made a copy of that.
I just made a copy of that because we have different ways we can do layouts. So we're going to make, so we could change the style sheet. Really what we need to do is change the style sheet to look at all of our different types of layouts. So I was thinking just make a copy and then do links to each one. Sorry, I probably wasn't very clear about that. Then we'll do, but all we really need to do is change this one thing. So we need, we'll look at absolute positioning, relative positioning, floating, flex, and grid. So we need 5 copies of it by the time we're done today. 5 copies of that, and then 5 copies of our style sheet. So I should, instead of starting from scratch and we don't lose our colors and stuff, I'm gonna go over the style sheet and do save as here as well. Save as absolute.css, which I have to overwrite that one that I created a moment ago to avoid typing all that stuff again. So, absolute positioning is fairly, that's where we take complete control over it. Say that maybe our header, I'll add a header line up here. So we want our header, we want that to be positioned. So we'll put the position and say absolute. And now we have to give explicit instructions about where that's going to be. So let's say from the top, we'll come down 2.3 elements, so 2.5 lines of text. And from the left, we'll come over 148 pixels. I think this will go ahead and change the width, but I'm going to go ahead and put a width in here anyway. And instead of a width, I'm saying minimum width. Make sure it's at least a certain width of 33% of our screen. So accentuating that unit thing we've seen before. So our header is going to go at least 33% of the screen. If it needs more, we'll allow that. And it's going to be so far down and so far from the top and so far from the left. Oh wait, I'm not on that page. Let me open the correct HTML file. Absolute. There we go. Notice, kind of hard to see there. Do you see where that header ended up? Came over a little bit and down a little bit and is laying right on top of the other paragraphs, which according to that wireframe I just drew should be underneath of it. That's sort of the drawback to absolute positioning, is once you start doing something absolute, everything has to be absolute. So once you make one element absolute position, everything else on your page needs to be positioned absolutely. Complete control over it, but the position is hard coded in there, so there's no adjustment for other screens or anything like that. There are places for it. I tend to move away from this, but now that we did that, well, it came over and down and down below our links. which should probably change here as well. Which link did I change? This link. I'll copy that and overwrite that so we can actually link to our pages. I'll probably need one back to the home page. List a href going back to index.html. Actually, there's a shortcut because we might not want index.html to show in there every time. I forgot an A, sorry. Href, and I'm just going to put dot. So dot refers to the initial version. Dot refers to the current directory we're in. So saying href dot, that just means go to the top of this directory and like we just navigated in this directory for the first time. And at that point, servers will open the index page. I should check and make sure that this one does too. So this one went up too far, doing it locally, but the server will go, when we put that on a server, it'll go back up to the top of the folder and be like, oh, there's an index.html file, that's the one we want. In our cases, I think I kind of want to stick with the default table of contents for today's example, because we're going to have 5 different copies of this same page. So back to absolute positioning. So we got our links here, but they're in kind of a weird spot next to where our header's at. So we need to move those down. So they're in an aside tag. So in our absolute style sheet, put the, I just looked at it, aside. The aside tag, and again, once we start with absolute positioning, everything after it has to be absolute positioned as well. The stuff before it we can keep in the regular layout, but once we hit an element where we position it absolutely, pretty much everything after it has to be positioned absolutely as well. So from the top, we want to come down a lot farther than that. So I'm going to say 333 pixels. I'm just guessing at a number coming down a little ways. Maybe that'll be down below it. And from the left to -30, just to show where negative numbers go. So it's from that side. So positive numbers are below that. So top positive is below, negative is above. Sometimes we do have to move things back up, and negative left goes further left, and a positive number on the left attribute goes to the right. We also have right, so we can do from the right. Okay, that's way too far. It took me a minute to find it, but it's way down there. So way too many pixels down. I'm gonna do 3, just to show you this. So notice it's here now. So it's above the previous one. We'll probably make that more negative. Make that negative 130. 83 might work. This is one of those things we could do some calculating and find the exact spot that we want it to go. But the calculations are really hard. Most people just do a little bit of trial and error. Just take your starting guess of where it should be and adjust the numbers till you get it where you want it. And probably want to do something different than what I just did. Maybe move those paragraphs out of the way first. We need to move those down. So let's say paragraph. Use absolute positioning. Position it, not position. From the top, let's do But again, time we use our points. 124 points. And then from the left, I'm bringing it over a ways. I'll do 124 points again. 1.5 points per pixel. So whatever 120, 120 times 1.5 would be 180 pixels. And then what do we have there? Another 6 pixels, 186 pixels. So those things can be calculated, but sometimes it's better to just do that. Caused a bit of a problem though. You might have thoughts on where the rest of our paragraphs went?
What was the question?
Any thoughts on where the rest of our paragraphs went? I went and put that absolute position in on there. And a moment ago, there was 5 paragraphs here. But after doing this line right here, it looks like we only have 1 now.
So did they get cut off or?
Something like that.
Are they shooting off into the distance on the right?
No, we don't have a scroll bar on the right, but both of y'all are getting really, really close. Here's a hint. Even numbered ones change colors, right? Or no, it wasn't even numbers. Never mind. You're both really, really close. They're behind it. Put all of them at the same.
They're all on top of each other.
Put them all at the same position, and then the margin on the last paragraph is blocking the others. So
that's why you usually contain all the paragraphs in a thing, and you move that thing.
Yes. I like to show errors instead of just fixing them. So what we want to do is put maybe a section tag. I'll put class equals left. Class name is relative to, well, in the picture we're doing columns, right? So that's gonna be our leftmost column. Seems like a good way to mark that. And I'll scroll down here, maybe put 2 paragraphs in that section. And then the second paragraph, and then in that section. The next one I'll put in an article. Put class name equals middle. Which normally we wouldn't, for consistency, we would probably wrap them all in sections. I'm just doing this to remind you all of the different names. Consistency goes a long way. And maybe put 2 paragraphs in that middle section. Because again, our semantic tags are just useful names for these. Section article, I'll go ahead and do div. Up until 2014, we only had one type of container element, a div, short for division. And then all those others are alternatively named divs with some default formatting already applied to them. Things that match, that should match what the name is. I'll put class equals right. And then this paragraph that's in here. And then in that if. So really, that's what we want to move here. I'm going to come down, put a new paragraph thing here. Close this curly brace and change this one to left. Just our paragraph selector. You see now that first paragraph or the first section of paragraph showed up about the right spot. And the other 2 or the other 3 just went back to the natural flow. Oh, and look what happened around, and then the footer is way up here before, in line with the end of the first paragraph. So you can kind of see the some of the problems with absolute positioning here. And to give columns, we can just give it a width value. So let's say width of 25%. And well, from the picture we have, I'm planning on putting 3 columns here, right? We're looking back at our wireframe, but we want space between them. So it's really easy a really easy mistake. Like, okay, I want 3 columns. A third of the way is 33%, so just put in that percent, but then you forget about the space between them. And remember in our design principles the other day, that white space is very important. Helps to organize things. We need to spread things out. If we don't spread them out, then we end up with pages that start to look like this, where it's really hard to figure out what information is where. That gives us our first column, and we can probably copy it for our next 2 columns. Which 25% is going to be way too wide, isn't that? We go back to the like 21%. Because there's all that stuff on all that space on the left. So our middle one, it'll come down about the same amount, but then we need to come over another so much distance. This is another useful one here. CSS can calculate stuff. So we'll call the calculate function. Where is that number? So calculate function, and then the parameters are the CSS units we want to calculate. So our first one, our first column is 124 points over. So we want to do that plus 21% of the page plus maybe 2.1 elements for a little bit of spacing between them. And that should calculate all the distances. We could sit down, pen and paper, figure out what that is, trial and error. But that function is really, really useful because we'll have all the other sizes there and we just add them up to move things left to right, up or down. That looks like a pretty good spacing over it, lined up nicely. And we can do the same thing on the right. Paste that in, make this our right thing, and I accidentally deleted some stuff. There we go. So we need to do all of this again. I'll copy that and paste it in, and put the plus sign. I meant to put the plus sign first and then just paste it. But move over that column width again. Move over the initial width, the width of the column, another 2.1 elements, the initial width, the width of the column, and another 2.1 elements. That might be too far over. Oh, I forgot to save it. So let that now move over. Oh, dot right. It's a class name. A class selector, so I forgot the dot. So the right one then goes over there, but we ended up, the math didn't work out so nicely just copying that over, which would have been the same as saying 2 times as much as that, right? 2 times and then wrap all that stuff we had in parentheses. From looking at this, I think we got that 124 point margin twice. So we only needed that once. But you'll encounter little issues like that. Actually, you'll encounter issues much bigger than that because remember the bubble up and cascade back down. When we change one element, all the other elements know about it. And I do practice examples ahead of time because I don't want to waste our time in class, but sometimes it will do very, very unpredictable things. At some point this semester, or in every class I teach, I do like to do at least one lesson example, lecture example that isn't prepared ahead of time. especially in things like this evening's class, the Python class, clearly show that when I don't prepare ahead of time and practice the lecture in advance, it's like it is when you all write code, right? Typos show up all the time. The logic of our algorithm changes along the way. I don't like to do that more than once in the class though, because it does kind of waste time. It's closer to matching our picture, except the footer, look where the footer's at now. That's not where we usually keep copyright information. So that's what I consider one of the biggest drawbacks of that, because sometimes it is nice to have absolute control over it. Especially when you get in modern software development and you're using your HTML and CSS to make your GUI for your application, make the GUI for your desktop application or mobile phone application and web application. We usually only make one and just show it in the other places for modern software development. And pretty much everybody just makes the web application first, and we show it as a desktop app or show it as a mobile app instead of in a browser. Absolute positioning is really nice there because your GUI is not going to change, your graphical user interface. But for typical websites, maybe not so much. I'll put the footer at the bottom. So footer, position, let's say absolute. And this time, instead of top, let's use bottom. And we'll say, oh, I don't know, 5 elements from the bottom. Let's see what that does for it. Well, that's kind of an odd spot. I was expecting it way lower than that. See what number it used? I'll leave my screen right here. Anybody want to take a guess at where it counted the bottom? Do you see it on there? The copyright.
So the bottom of your screen by default, like where you.
Yes, it used the bottom of the screen, not the bottom of the page. So be careful with bottom. But again, if you're doing if you're using HTML and CSS to make your graphical user interface for an application that has maybe Python running on the back end, then that's fine because you're not going to have probably not going to have a scroll bar, right? It's all going to fit right in the window you make.
I'm trying to figure out why the hell mine doesn't look like yours.
It takes some trial and error. That's what I said I want to wrap up by 3, but I'm hoping to maybe be 5 or 10 minutes before so that there's like an hour of time to mess around with this because you will want to just kind of play around with it. Like some of the things in game development. In game development, it was easier because there was only one way to position things, right? We have lots of ways to put things together, and some of them are non-intuitive, and you'll want to go back and forth, and we're going to look at the best reference material for CSS today, so that'll make a difference. So where's the footer? Footer.
It's like it doesn't know what the heck I mean by calc.
By what? Calc?
Yeah.
Should work calc. And then in parentheses, add.
Like I just put a stupidly large number in the calculation just to make it go through, and nothing changed. So he doesn't understand what calc means.
Everything's saved.
Yeah.
Make sure you clear your cache. So your browser cache only looks at HTML changes. So if you change CSS, the browser might decide to load from the cache. I'll take a look at it when we take a break here in about 3 minutes. I just want to put this somewhere useful. Let's say top. And then we would need all of our sizes to really figure out where that needs to be. It'll be a lot easier when we get to relative in a moment. Actually, I'm just going to leave it there. Yeah, it's useful for graphical user interfaces, which we're not doing in this class. We're more concerned with typical web pages. So absolute positioning gets a little funny, but let's finish this up with one other thing. I'm coming up to that navigation bar we put together. Oh, there's a nav. I should have used nav elements. The nav is the one that's sort of for navigation bar, NAV, but we don't have to necessarily follow the labels. We can use them any way we want. And instead of absolute positioning, I want to change this to fixed. So our navigation bar is now fixed position, which is just like absolute or relative position, which we'll see after the break. So when we start the page, it looks the same, but fixed, it stays there. So most useful for the back to top buttons, because that's something you're going to put on lots and lots and lots of web pages that you make. The standard is down in the bottom right corner. So bottom 50 pixels, right 300 pixels, and then you have that link that says back to top. So you can jump right back up to the top. But a few more elements that's starting to help make our stuff look a little more interesting, right? I'm gonna get that mouse out of the way. Having two mouses on the screen is confusing me. So I'm gonna move the one on that computer. Any questions about that? I'll give it 5 seconds. Okay, yeah, and when you start playing around and just doing random practice to trial and error, see what happens, you can send me questions then as well. Questions don't have to be reserved for in class. I'm always happy to help. Actually, I think I told you all during the semester when classes run, there's only 2 things that make noise on my phone: text messages and the Ivy Learn inbox. So really, messages from you all are the only ones that I get notified about. Anybody else just has to wait till I see it. This one, we won't, you might, right? We all have our own style. We think slightly different. I pretty much never use this for web pages, but in the long run, for your software development career, you're going to get into frameworks within a couple of classes: Django framework, .NET framework, Spring framework, whatever programming language you choose around the 200 level. And when you see frameworks and the modern way of making applications, and then hybrid apps, when you get to the SDEV 257 class, we use CSS to put together our graphical user interface. And then we just show it. Well, really, it's without the rose bar. Most people make it in a web application, and then we load it in a special browser that doesn't have a bar, the address bar, so we can't go to any other page. It's like everything below that gray line. If we take everything below that gray line, it doesn't look like a browser anymore. VS Code is that way. Actually, that has been more than 50% of software for over 10 years now. So VS Code is definitely that way, but there's a good chance that over half the software on your computer is actually a web application that they took the browser bar away from. So it looks like a desktop application because you can't go to any other web pages. That's the modern way of making software development. Absolute positioning gets used a lot more there, at least the way I do things. You might like absolute positioning, but some of our others are a bit more dynamic, because let's look at that size thing. Okay, if I start resizing this, it is fixed, or it is absolutely positioned there. Oh, it's not resizing on the camera. Maybe I do it this way. Let me open the inspector. The camera doesn't keep up until I let go of the mouse. What if I drag this one? Okay, the camera shows it here, right? As our page resizes, or our window resizes, we didn't leave any wiggle room. We didn't leave any responsiveness to adjust for different screen sizes. So some of our others are much better for that. The third one we're going to look at is my personal preference, just because of more experience with it, because I was doing this for years and years before the last two that we look at were invented. The last two that we look at are by far the easiest way, but I have years of experience of what came right before they were invented that I tend to, unless I think ahead and be like, oh yeah, Flex and Grid exists, I tend to go back to what I've done for a long time. Okay, the third one we looked at. The second one be better, but probably a good time for a break first, right? 10 minutes sound good to everybody? Anybody? Got a head nod in the classroom.
Sounds great.
All right, so my laptop says 2:02. We will get back to it at 2:12, and next up is relative layouts.